Hi, my name is Vendla Bramble, and I write the science fiction Blood Hunt series. I've been told that perhaps I should introduce myself before doing a reading from one of my books, and I thought this would be a good time to clarify a few things first. The storyline and the plot idea behind the original story happened clear back in, I believe it was 2001 or 2002, with an online RPG group that was started by Christopher and Jonas Asquith, two brilliant young men who came up with a scientific theory behind it all, and it kind of went from there. And I saw the great potential for it, and I asked, hey, could I run, this from my heroine's point of view in a book series? And they said, sure, go for it. So as such, you should be known that the plot line, the storyline, the characters, they've all been copyrighted just to keep things on the up and up, make sure no one stole their original idea and ran with it without their permission. Now, this happens in the 22nd century on an alternate timeline from ours. However, in that alternate timeline, the heroine is actually my great-great-granddaughter. And her name is First Lieutenant Kayla Day Ann McMahon. She's also known as Kai. When the series started, she was just a chief warrant officer. So as it's progressed, she's gone up in rank. And she is not only a specialized soldier, she also runs a survival training center. So I think perhaps some history of how this all came about would be a good idea. In the very first book, Blood Hunt, Rolling Thunder, there's an introduction, and it is repeated in every book. So here we go. Suppose the Red Army had not stopped at Berlin. Would it change our world? Suppose the Manhattan Project had never happened. Would it matter? What difference would it make if perhaps Russia had reached the moon first, then made it to Mars as well? Let's take a step into an alternate reality. Consider for a moment what would happen if the first men on Mars returned home with something they hadn't bargained for. A microorganism that altered humans on the cellular level and gave them the ability to produce, for all intents and purposes, magic. This is the world of our great-great-grandchildren, one step aside from our own path. For over 2 centuries, the earth has been torn with wars, fear, and treachery. From 1903 to 2103 AD, various political factions came to power only to be toppled by stronger regimes. For a long time, it did look as if the communist Russia would fulfill its dream of world domination, and it almost succeeded. The United States of America nearly fell during the American Socialist Revolution, which raged for 3 years. America was weakened by it, losing the east and west coasts, plus the western half of Alaska for a little while, to socialist occupation. But the remaining section of the U.S. still managed to retain its capitalistic democratic ideals and became known as Free America. By 2208, the Russians had successfully colonized the moon, and the world governments became weaker against Soviet domination. A decade of space exploration opened up more possibilities, and with the introduction of magic brought on by an alien organism, uncertainty and war escalated. As fate would have it, the magic is what saved the world from Soviet domination. Gulag prisoners infused with these magical powers overcame their guards and toppled the mightiest governmental power of the world. The Soviet Revolution spread across the globe, and by 2076, the Soviet Union was broken. The people who had magic abilities became known as Bloods. During all the turmoil, an idea in the United States, or Free America, was born. Various wealthy conglomerates wanted a way to protect their interests and civilians from socialist control. Pooling their resources, a vast organization came into being, the Free America Civil Militia, also known as FAC. After much misunderstanding and intense negotiations, the U.S. government and militaries came to an agreement with the FAC. Because of touchy political storms, there were areas the government's hands were tied. But since they had no official ties to the government, the FAC could intervene, and often did, on a regular basis. Not only were the FAC soldiers highly trained, some of them were also powerful Bloods. With headquarters and substations scattered strategically across free America, the FAC helped keep the borders secure. Many brave men and women have dedicated their lives and magic to defend free America, also known as FAM, all thanks to the FAC. Now, there's a few other things that you should know about. There is they identified the, quote, organism, unquote, that altered the structure of the Bloods. And it's a really long word. All this was dreamed up by Christopher and Jonas. So please forgive me if I stumble over a few words, because I'm not exactly the scientific type of person. The thaumatochondria are found circulating in the bloodstream. They work similarly to a muscle, but instead of producing physical power, they produce this, I call it T energy, to shorten the word. How this energy is converted into a T phenomenon, i.e. magic, is still unknown, but they have noted there is a cost. The byproduct of the T stimulation is something so long it takes about 15 minutes to pronounce. So normally everybody refers to it as CDAT, which is an enzyme that happens to be extremely toxic to the human body. With muscle tissue, there's an overuse leads to buildup of lactic acid naturally, which causes fatigue and eventually loss of performance. CDAT is similar, only it builds up more quickly, and its effects can be much more severe than lactic acid. Headaches, nosebleeds, nausea are common. In fact, the first sign is usually that nosebleed and pale, clammy skin, which could be looked at as shock. More extensive overuse could lead to liver and kidney damage, and people have been known to die. The main bottleneck to producing powerful spells is not the fact that the T cannot produce the necessary energy. Instead, it's a continual buildup of the CDAT. Now, the T energy is measured using the Madoyan scale, which was invented by Professor Reynold Madoyan in 2084. The more energy produced, the more powerful the spell, naturally. However, and that means a greater amount of energy on the scale. Now, they found in vitro the stimulated T had consistently yielded results of 1,500 to 2,000 Madoyan units, or MADs, when tested. This, however, results in massive amounts of CDAT release, enough to easily kill someone rather quickly if it was done in the human body. In humans, they have found the highest on the range is usually about 300 to 500 MADs. At the higher end will still result in severe headaches and nausea, the nosebleeds. Any expenditure they're thinking of greater than 500 MADs is considered life-threatening. It is said the space colonies are working on a portable dialysis device that would remove the CDAT from the blood as it's produced, thereby greatly enhancing the blood's abilities. But so far, that's only been a speculation. Now, there is something called the Millennium Experiment, which I'll talk about in a minute. For the descendants of the Millennium Experiment, the situation is vastly different. The mutated super T in their bodies produces 2/3 less CDAT than the normal T. Therefore, it is conceivable that those carrying the STMC could produce abilities up to 1,000 MADs with no ill effects, and can go up to 1,500 before it becomes life-threatening. And there's been a few of the Millennium Bloods, is what they're being called, that are producing more than 1,500 without getting sick. And everybody's just boggled by that. Well, here's where we talk about the Millennium Bloods. Now, they came about because of an experiment that happened back in 1999. Some scientists were curious to see if there was a way to enhance certain inborn abilities that some people seem to have. There was like telepathy, empathy, being able to raise energies, talking with plants and getting them to respond. Things like that. They gathered a handful of volunteers. In that timeline, I was one of them, from across the United States and all over the world, really. And many of them were self-professed witches, natural healers, pagans from all walks of life. And the scientists radiated their blood with certain gamma rays. Plus, they took samples of each person's DNA so they could alter certain structures that were allegedly responsible for the firing of synapses in the ancient mammalian diving reflex. Apparently, that particular mysterious unused organ was supposed to be the reason for certain people having things like telepathy. And once the DNA was satisfactorily altered, they were reintroduced back into the original donor. Rumor had it that the experiments were to see if a super army could be created, so the government would have something to combat the Red Army. But by the year 2000, the experiment was considered a failure and was phased out. However, turns out we volunteers weren't exactly forthcoming with the scientists. The experiments did work. Too well in some cases. And a few of the volunteers were committed to sanitariums because their heightened awareness drove them insane. The rest of us, well, we seemed to handle it rather well. And our descendants from then on inherited the new gene. That's where Kai comes in. Kai is a particularly interesting Millennium Blood. She's what they call an Earth Warrior. She can talk with the planet. She can talk with all the animals that walk, crawl, fly, and gets along with them, except for reptiles, particularly alligators. She has a feud with them. There's one other thing that you're going to hear mention of when I'm reading one of the books, and it's something called an Earth Keeper. Now, in our time frame, there are such things as Earth Keepers. They are massive crystals, and they're scattered all across the planet and usually buried very deep down. And unfortunately, they discovered a cave like that, I think, down in South America or Mexico. And fortunately, it's too hot for anybody to be in there very safely for very long. Anyway, Kai can talk with these Earth Keepers. I think that pretty much covers the basis of what Blood Hunt is about. She heads, like I said, a survival training center for the FAC. She's half Osage and half Irish, so she lives on a reservation in southern Missouri, a very massive reservation. The Osage have reservations in that timeline in South Missouri, North Arkansas, eastern Oklahoma, eastern Kansas. And Free America government has an understanding with them. You do not trespass, you do not mess with the Osage, and the Osage will help you. That's how come the Survival Training Center is on the Zishu Reservation in southern Missouri. I think that pretty much covers it. This will be part 1. I will start on part 2 with the book.